We want to use our bottom arm and we're going to rest it as a pillow to get nice and comfortable. With the top arm, we're going to go ahead and plant the palm firmly on the floor, raise the elbow to stabilize the scapular girdle. With the contralateral hip, we're going to go into flexion of the hip and then external rotation and abduction, plant the foot firmly on the ground. With the ipsilateral... Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with TB4Work, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to be your own therapist by demonstrating the top 5 strengthening exercises for posture correction. And more specifically, I'm going to be teaching you how to correct a posterior pelvic tilt. Before I actually get on with the exercises, I first want to explain what exactly a posterior pelvic tilt is and why exactly you should care. A posterior pelvic tilt, or retroversion of the pelvis, is when your pelvis is tilted posteriorly. Ideally for men, anywhere from 4 to 7 degrees of anteversion or an anterior pelvic tilt is going to be acceptable, and for women, anywhere from 7 to 11 degrees is going to be acceptable. Whenever it falls below that range, that is what it is going to be considered dysfunctional, and if you don't address it, it can lead to things like low back pain, hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, and also foot pain, so you would want to address it immediately. And one of the ways in which we could address it would be to do some strengthening exercises for the muscles that are responsible for anteversion or anteriorly tilting the pelvis. That's what we're going to be doing today, so without further ado, here are the top 5 strengthening exercises for posture correction to correct a posterior pelvic tilt. The first strengthening exercise for posture correction to correct a posterior pelvic tilt is going to be for the psoas major muscle. For the psoas major muscle, I'm going to be taking you through 4 different variations. This first one, you want to be in a seated position, and this one right over here is going to be targeting the antero-medial fibers, and more specifically, the distal portion of the antero-medial fibers. For it, we're going to be in a seated position, and we want our feet off of the floor, so we don't want anything touching. Then, from here, we want a nice tall spine. We've got a flat lumbar, flat thoracic, our chin is tucked in, crown of the head is pushing up, eyes are looking down at the floor, tip of the dura mater under tension. With the arms, we want our arms at the level of the glenohumeral angle. If you don't know where that is, depending on your morphology, anywhere from 90 to 135 degrees. For the average person, when your arms are fully extended and the palms are at the level of your forehead or even slightly higher, that's going to be your glenohumeral angle. Then, from this position right over here, we want to go into maximum extension of elbows and wrists, maximum external rotation of shoulders, and then in terms of the principle of action for this one, all we're going to do is hip flexion. And for this one, what we want to do is take the ipsilateral leg and bring it toward the ipsilateral shoulder. So whatever leg we're using, we want to try and bring it toward the same side shoulder. And this is the strengthening exercise for the psoas major, specifically the distal portion of the antero-medial fibers. Next, if we want to target the postero-lateral fibers, specifically the distal portion of the postero-lateral fibers, it's going to be the exact same, only a couple minor differences. First, we're going to take the ipsilateral hand and we're going to place it over the ear. Then, what we want to do is go into some slight ipsilateral rotation of the lumbar spine. Ipsilateral rotation meaning we're rotating toward the side that we are stretching, and we want to make sure that all of the rotation is coming from the lumbar spine and not from the thoracic. Then, from here, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to take the ipsilateral knee and bring it toward the ipsilateral shoulder. And this is the strengthening exercise for the psoas major, specifically the distal portion of the posterolateral fibers. Then, if we want to target the proximal portion of the antero-medial fibers, what we're going to do is we're going to be in a supine position, meaning you're laying down on your back. What you want to do for this one is you want to flex the hip and knee to induce retroversion of the pelvis, and you want to create a lamnoscat with the contralateral leg. So we want to go big toe up, we're going to flatten the medial arch, external rotation of tibia, medial rotation of femur, and then at the lumbar spine, flat lumbar, flat thoracic, our chin is tucked in, crown of the head away, eyes looking down at the floor to put the dura mater under tension. With the arms, we're going to bring them at the level of the glenohumeral angle. And then for this one, all we want to do is go into flexion of the hip. And this is for the proximal portion of the antero-medial fibers of the psoas major. Then, if we want to target the proximal portion of the posterolateral fibers, it's going to be the exact same thing. There's just going to be one minor difference. For this one, we're going to go into contralateral flexion. So we're going to bend away from the side that we are strengthening, and everything else is exactly the same. We got the lamnoscat in the leg. We have retroversion of pelvis, flat lumbar, flat thoracic, chin tucked in, crown of the way, eyes looking down at the floor to put the dura mater under tension, arms at the level of the glenohumeral angle. With the contralateral side bend, all we're going to do for this one is go into flexion of the femur. And this is for the proximal portion of the posterolateral fibers of the psoas major. Next, the second strengthening exercise for a posterior pelvic tilt is going to be for the rectus femoris. For the rectus femoris, I'm going to be taking you through 3 different variations. These first 2, you're going to be in a supine position, meaning you're going to be laying down on your back, and you want your feet supported off of you want your feet not supported on the ground. So I'm going to be using the bench for this one right over here. Before it, what we want to do, if we want to target the distal fibers, what we're going to do is work on knee flexion. So we're going to bring our arms out to the side. Just imagine that my arms are resting on the floor at the level of the glenohumeral angle. Then we're going to do knee flexion, and this is to target the distal fibers of the rectus femoris muscle. Then, if we want to target the proximal fibers, what we're going to do is prioritize hip flexion. So in the exact same position, all we're going to do is go into hip flexion, and this is for the proximal fibers of the rectus femoris muscle. If we want to target the intermediate fibers of the rectus femoris, then we're going to be in a standing position, and we're essentially doing a single-legged sissy squat. So again, we're in a standing position. The ipsilateral leg, the leg that we're working, we want it straight underneath our hip, and then with the contralateral leg, we're going to place it behind our hip, and we don't want to weight bear on that actual limb. It's just going to be there more for support and balance. Then, from this position, we want retroversion of the pelvis, flat lumbar spine, flat thoracic, our chin is tucked in, crown of the head is up, eyes are looking down at the floor to put the dura mater under tension, and the principle of action, we want to go ahead and squat by flexing the knee and flexing the hip, and we want to maintain a nice straight line from our ear down toward our knee. And this right over here is the strengthening exercise for the rectus femoris, specifically for the intermediate fibers of the rectus femoris. Next, the third strengthening exercise for posture correction to correct a posterior pelvic tilt is going to be for the adductor longus muscle. And for this one, I'm going to be taking you through 3 different variations. This first one right over here is going to be specifically to target the distal fibers of the adductor longus muscle. And for it, we're going to be in a side lying position. So you're going to rest on your side, use your arm as a pillow to get nice and comfortable. Then, with the contralateral leg or the top leg, we want to go into flexion of hip and knee, and then abduction and external rotation and plant the foot firmly on the floor. Then, with the ipsilateral leg, with the leg that we're working, we want to flex our leg to about 45 degrees. With the contralateral arm, so the top arm, we're going to plant it firmly on the floor, and we're going to raise the elbow to stabilize the scapular girdle. Then we want slight flexion of the knee, we want dorsiflexion of ankle, inversion of ankle, and then we want to get into medial rotation of the femur. So we're going to bring the knee up toward the sky. And then in terms of the principle of action, we're going to do a combination of adduction, and then we're going to also go from medial rotation to lateral rotation, but we want to prioritize the lateral rotation over the adduction of the femur, and this is the strengthening exercise for the adductor longus, specifically the distal fibers. Then, if we want to target the intermediate fibers, we're going to get into a seated position. We want to be supported on our elbows, so we're just going to go ahead and rest on our back. Then, from this position right over here, same thing, we're going to go ahead and flex the hip and knee, plant the foot firmly on the floor. We want to create a lemniscate, so big toe up, flatten the medial arch, external rotation of tibia, medial rotation of femur, flat lumbar, flat thoracic, chin tucked in, crown of the head away, eyes looking down at the floor to put the dura mater under tension. With the ipsilateral leg, or the leg that we're working, we want to go ahead and flex the knee slightly, and then we're going to go into abduction and external rotation. Then, in terms of the principle of action, what we want to do for this one right over here is we are going to go into a combination of medial rotation and adduction. And for this one right over here, we are prioritizing the medial rotation. And this is the strengthening exercise for the adductor longus, specifically for the intermediate fibers. And then lastly, if we want to target the proximal fibers, we're going to be in a half kneeling position, so as though you're in the bottom position of a lunge. For this one right over here, what we want to do is we're going to take the contralateral leg, and we are going to bring it right out to the side. Then we want the foot outside of the knee, we want retroversion of the pelvis, flat lumbar, flat thoracic, our chin is tucked in, crown of the head away, eyes looking down at the floor to put the dura mater under tension. With the arms, maximum extension of elbow and wrist, maximum external rotation of shoulders, project the palm forward. With the ipsilateral leg, we want to go into medial rotation by taking the ankle and foot outside of the knee. And then for this one, we are going to be doing an isometric contraction. We're going to do that by driving the ipsilateral knee toward the contralateral heel. And then we're going to maintain an isometric contraction for up to 10 seconds. And this is the strengthening exercise for the adductor longus, specifically the proximal fibers. Next, the fourth strengthening exercise for posture correction to correct the posterior pelvic tilt is going to be for the adductor brevis. For this one right over here, we want to go ahead and get into a side lying position once again. We want to use our bottom arm, and we're going to rest it as a pillow to get nice and comfortable. With the top arm, we're going to go ahead and plant the palm firmly on the floor, raise the elbow to stabilize the scapular girdle. With the contralateral hip, we're going to go into flexion of the hip, and then external rotation and abduction, plant the foot firmly on the ground. With the ipsilateral leg, we're going to flex the hip to 30 degrees and maintain slight flexion flexion of the knee. Then from this position right over here, what we want to do is we are going to go into medial rotation of the femur by bringing the knee up. And then in terms of the principle of action for this one, we want to go ahead and go from medial to lateral rotation. And once again, we are going to be prioritizing the lateral rotation over the adduction of the femur. And this is the strengthening exercise for the adductor brevis, specifically the superficial fibers and the distal portion of the superficial fibers. Then, if we want to target the inferior fibers, it's going to be the exact same thing. Only difference, we're flexing it to 45 degrees of hip flexion, and then we want a neutral position, so we're not starting in medial rotation. And for this one right over here, we are going to be prioritizing the adduction. So all we're going to do is go into straight hip adduction, and this is the strengthening exercise for the adductor brevis, specifically the inferior fibers and the distal portion of the inferior fibers. Next, the fifth and final strengthening exercise for posture correction to correct the posterior pelvic tilt is going to be for the longissimus. For the longissimus, there's going to be two different variations I'm going to be taking you through. The first one is going to be for the cephalic portion, or the top portion of the longissimus. For each of them, we're going to be in a prone position, meaning you're laying down on your stomach. If we want to target the proximal fibers, the caudal, the cephalic fibers, what we're going to do, first, we're going to go ahead and rest our hands right underneath our head. And then for this one, we're going to focus on trunk extension. And this is the strengthening exercise for the longissimus, specifically the cephalic portion. Then, if we want to target the caudal portion, or the lower portion of the longissimus muscle, we're going to end up getting in the same position, so our hands are underneath our head and we're resting them there. And then for this one, what we want to do is prioritize lumbar extension by raising our hips up off the ground. And this is the strengthening exercise for the longissimus, specifically the caudal fibers. And there you have it. Those were the top 5 strengthening exercises for posture correction to correct the posterior pelvic tilt. If you have a posterior pelvic tilt, or if you have issues with regard to low back pain, hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, or foot pain, go ahead and give those exercises a try. And if you have given them a try, go ahead and drop your comments down in the comment section and let me know what you guys thought. In terms of the sets and repetitions for the exercises, what you want to do is 3 sets of 50 repetitions. That's 5-0, not 1-5, for each of the exercises. The reason we're going so high with the repetitions is because we're trying to elicit a postural change. Whenever we're trying to elicit a postural change, one of the most important things is going to be accumulating time under tension. So if we do the typical 8 to 12 bodybuilding repetition rep range, we're not going to be able to accumulate that time under tension. So 3 sets of 50 repetitions for each of the exercises. This coming Saturday at 10 o'clock a.m., I'm going to be taking you through the top 5 myofascial stretching exercises for posture correction to correct the posterior pelvic tilt. So be out on the lookout for that, because those are going to be a terrific complement to the strengthening exercises that we did today. But that's pretty much it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to keep making these types of videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.